If somehow you were able to be airlifted directly or teleported directly from 1994 to 2024, you'd notice an awful lot of changes. Primary among them would be the internet. But the biggest change you'd probably notice about our public conversation is how white people were so openly attacked and denigrated. Yes, a racial group. So in 1994, you were about 30 years past the Civil Rights Movement. And in 1994, the operating assumption of virtually everyone in the United States was the main lesson of the Civil Rights Movement, of the letter from the Birmingham jail, the Edmund Bridge, and all the different sacred moments that we grew up hearing about. The main lesson of those moments was it is immoral, in fact unacceptable, to attack people on the basis of their race. So then if you fast forwarded 30 years to find the same country engaged in a public hate frenzy against people because of their race, you would find that bewildering. How did this happen? Of course, there would be the discrimination, the institutional racism of hurting people on the basis of their race in hiring, in admissions to schools, in federal contracting, in promotions. There would be all of that. But there would also be the public manifestation of it, of saying out loud, we just don't like you. You're not as good. You are morally defective because of your skin color. You say this about white people who founded the United States. You'd be shocked by that. And then to turn on the TV and see the president of the United States do the very same thing, you'd think maybe you'd been drinking ayahuasca. You'd see Joe Biden say things like this.
History has thrust one more urgent task on us. Will we be the generation that finally wipes out the stain of racism from our national character? We've all seen the knee of injustice on the neck of Black America. Racism, nativism, fear, demonization have long torn us apart. But a black parent, no matter how wealthy or how poor they are, has to teach their child when you're walking down the street, don't have a hoodie on when you go across the street. Domestic terrorism from white supremacists is the most lethal terrorist threat in the homeland.
If I were your daughter, what advice would you give me the next time I am stopped by the police?
If you were my daughter, you'd be a Caucasian girl and you wouldn't be pulled over.
White supremacy is the most lethal threat to the United States. White people are the threat. They are evil and they are dangerous. It's not just a senile president making that one statement. That is the people in charge of the country reinforcing that statement, and that means every single day of the year, not just by their words, but with their deeds. What is this? A lot of people mention it's happening. Why does anyone who does mention it's happening get attacked as a white supremacist for complaining about racism? And maybe more important, where does it go? Is there any other ending to the story but hurting people physically? Lots of people. Could we have a resolution of something like Rwanda? Jeremy Carl is an author who's thought a lot about this. He's got a great new book called The Unprotected Class: How Anti-White Racism is Tearing America Apart. He joins us now. Jeremy, thanks so much for coming on. So it may be an advantage or maybe a disadvantage of being a little bit older that this is like the one thing we never thought, or I never thought we'd see in America, which is our leaders openly attacking people on the basis of their race just 60 years after the Civil Rights Movement, which supposedly started in the Civil Rights Act. How did this happen?
Well, it's an interesting question, right? And I think you just hit on a key point, which is 60 years. We are as far now from the Civil Rights Act as they were basically from the Wright brothers. So there's been a lot of time that's kind of a lot of water under the bridge since that time, and a lot of things have happened. And I think it was begun with very sincere intentions, but I think rather quickly, certainly 10, 20, 30 years down the line, it got really hijacked to the point that we went from trying to treat people equally to what has eventually amounted to reverse racism.
Right, or just, I guess I would just call it racism, because it seems like the standard would remain the same, no matter the race of the person being discriminated against. You can't attack people, you can't punish people for the color of their skin, for how they were born. So that seems like a pretty easy principle to uphold. It's pretty straightforward.
Well, I would agree with you, Tucker, but it's nonetheless, we're really seeing throughout, and this is what I really wrote the book about, throughout many different areas of endeavor, and whether that be when we're looking at how crime gets talked about, to what's going on in Hollywood, to the educational system and monuments coming down and everything you could imagine. Kind of the white person is kind of the great enemy. It's the kind of the evil guy in 1984, the kind of 2 minutes of hate we have to have against him. The Emmanuel Goldstein figure kind of is the white person, and particularly the Democratic Party's discourse today.
What's interesting, though, is typically when you see these moments of scapegoating, clearly, kind of inherent to people. I mean, they pop up in every society at every time through history. Like, there's something in people that wants to separate a small group and, like, blame all its problems in that group. But it's usually it's the minority, of course. The persecuted minority. Whites are still, for at least as of today, probably change soon, of course, but they're still the majority in the country. So, like, have you ever seen anything like that happen?
I haven't, Tucker. It's kind of amazing to watch because whites are still a 58% majority. It's no longer a majority of the under 18, but of adults, it's still a solid majority. It's a super majority of our voters still in every presidential election, although just barely in the last presidential election. And yet they've become this figure of hate. And it's really been kind of fascinating and disturbing to watch and to kind of think about why that happened. And one of the things I suggest in my book is that really ultimately this is a legitimizing ideology for ultimately resource transfer and resource confiscation. And that takes the form of some of this reparations conversation or land back or some of these other things. And they sort of start out on the extreme left and everybody goes, oh, well, that's silly, that's never going to happen. And then all of a sudden, it is happening and you're a racist if you think it's a bad idea.
Yeah, I mean, and of course it's happened, and it's still happening in other countries. Rhodesia became Zimbabwe, and the whites were killed, and their land was taken, and their money stolen. And it's happening in South Africa right now.